Hello, CRE 101 students. This is Mary Ellen Ornberger, and I'm going to walk you through the 8 kinds of main ideas. For many of you, this might be review, so feel free to just download the PowerPoint and look at it as opposed to watching this video if you feel confident after looking at the PowerPoint that you understand the concepts here. For those of you who need some more detailed lecturing on main ideas, here we go. So even though a main idea in its definition is what it is, it's the central focus of a work or a piece of writing or an argument or a television show, they're not all the same. And what's important here in the connection to CRE is that the forms vary with the kinds of thinking in which we are engaged, and understanding them will help you understand what you read. Not only that, it'll help you engage critically to think about what's written and how the writing that you do online will be more cohesive, more structured, more successful if you take the time to think about the structure of writing and reading and arguments. So if you're a note taker, here is a list of the 8 types of main ideas. Please hit pause and write them down so as we go through this lecture, you can take some notes if that's helpful to you as a learner. So the first main idea is the most common. It's description support. Descriptive statements tell us about the qualities and characteristics of persons, places, objects, and events. And here's examples of descriptive statements that lead to support. You would need support for these descriptive statements. So the first one says, Mardi Gras is an exciting, unpredictable time of year. And what would follow is a description of how Mardi Gras is exciting and unpredictable. The statement needs that support for that argument that is made here. I'm seeing a typo. I apologize for that. And then the second example, many of our healthcare programs are wasteful. The rest of the writing would support how healthcare is wasteful. So that argument that healthcare programs are wasteful needs to be supported with details to elaborate on that. So the description and support is also most common because a subject can also be described by statements regarding behaviors, significant actions, or characteristic functions. And that's where action verbs come into place. So here's another example of a description support statement. The savings and loan scandal will cost taxpayers over $500 billion. The rest of the writing would have to support how the scandal will cost the taxpayers. You know, it's a pretty loaded argument here that we're making, and if we're going to believe this person who's making this argument, we would need the reasons why. So the how is what would follow here. So the types of articles that use the description support model are typically found in magazines and newspapers, whether they're online or in print. And they feature profiles of people, places, or things. So think of a travel magazine, or a car or auto magazine, or even magazines about celebrities, superstars, like People magazine. They usually have a central focus on the special characteristics or behaviors of the subject, whether those characteristics or behaviors are good or bad, and the description and the support follows that model. Again, it's the most common type of main idea. So for each of these 8 main ideas, I want you to reflect on where you've encountered this type before. So take a moment to think about your own writing, and I'm wondering if you can think of a feature piece, like a paper that you've done for a course, that followed the description support model. I taught high school English for a very, very long time, and I know that when I ask students to write summaries or to write shorter pieces of work or even to write a narrative about themselves, typically the description/support model of main idea and then writing was followed in order to get students to write. So I want you to always connect what we're practicing here to the other learning you're doing in other courses or what you've done in the past to show that you're always building knowledge and you're always expanding your knowledge. So the second main idea type is comparison contrast. And this is when we observe similarities between two or more things and compare them, or differences between two or more things and highlight those differences, the contrast part. So here you can see that there is a picture of the surface of Mars, a very small part of Mars, and a very small part of the Sahara Desert with some camels and nomads or camel riders. And here's our example. There are many similarities between the planet Mars and the Sahara Desert on Earth, but their differences are also numerous. So if we were to write a paper that starts with this sentence, we would highlight a couple of the similarities here, perhaps the color, the consistency of the sand, the fact that there is very little water in both places, etc. But then most of it would occur to talk about the contrasts. This is Mars, a planet in our solar system. This is Earth. This is uninhabitable. People can actually live in the Sahara Desert on Earth. So, we could go on and on about the differences, but it's a good example of how comparison and contrast works as a main idea in one document. So again, I want you to reflect about your own writing and think of a feature piece, again, that used the comparison contrast model. Again, as a high school English teacher, we used the comparison contrast model frequently to have students write, specifically about characters in novels. Whether they be in the same novel or in different novels. It was a pretty common way to get students to think about and write about and demonstrate that they understood what they were learning in a piece of literature. So the third main idea type is time sequence. Our lives are driven by time, therefore much of what we write is also driven by time. Historical documents, history textbooks are time-driven. Recipes are time-driven. Even how-to manuals, to a certain extent, are time-driven. So any of you who are in technical fields, who like to cook, who are really into history in the History Channel, you should be very familiar with this main idea model of a time sequence. And here's a couple of examples. The tragedy of 9/11 was soon followed by a sharp decrease in air travel. I certainly remember that the days following September 11, 2001 were eerie, and part of that eeriness was that there were no airplanes in the sky. It was bizarre because it was so quiet in a large city. So there's a sort of serious historical example, but here's a lighter example of how you could take a mixer's manual, such as this one here, and learn all the drink recipes, and it would show you or help you in the steps to becoming an amazing mixologist, and then maybe get a great job as a bartender and make lots of money. So there's some examples for you. So then I want you to think about moments that you've experienced the time sequence model. Maybe you've had to give directions, maybe you've recounted or written out a recipe, the procedures to fix something, and have used the time sequence model. Again, a very common pattern, but not the most common. And I just want you to connect with what you're learning, with what you're doing here. So the fourth example is cause-effect. We use this main idea when determining the why or when in laying responsibility. It is also time-driven, and there's a couple of different ways that cause and effect patterns work. For example, we can have the one cause to many effect pattern or the many causes to one effect pattern. So here's September 11th or 9/11, and we're using it for both. The 9/11 tragedy led to increased national security, loss of jobs, recession, and on a positive note, national pride. So one cause, 9/11, resulting in many effects. Here's it reversed, where we have many causes leading to the effect of 9/11. Lack of security in airports and borders, worldwide disdain for the U.S., lack of cooperation between the FBI and the CIA, all contributed to the tragedy of 9/11. So many causes to one effect. So I want you to think about this model again and just reflect on when you have written a paper for a course that's centered on a problem or an issue that may have followed the cause-effect model. In a little while, we'll talk about problem and solution, of which cause and effect model is a part. So we'll get back to that idea, because if you've ever written about a problem or an issue, you've probably followed the cause-effect model or the problem-solution model. So our fifth main idea type is classification, and it's used to break a large category into subgroups, as we have an example here. So here's an example for math. Numbers is our very large category or major class, with each subclass listed and connected to each major class. And notice that some of these classes dead end. For example, we've got real numbers and complex numbers, we've got rational numbers and irrational numbers, and we've dead ended here a little bit with complex and irrational. The rational numbers are connected with all of these pieces over here, but they're still connected to that larger class of numbers. So here's another classification example that sort of picks on bosses for a little bit here. There's much overlap, right? But there are 5 basic types of bosses: the bully boss, the paranoid boss, the narcissist boss, the bureau crazy boss, and the disaster hunter boss. And if you've ever experienced one of these, you can probably hear the disaster hunter, not looking for solutions, always looking for problems and employees that have caused those problems. The narcissist, the boss that's only out for him or herself and really doesn't care about the work of the employees, unless, of course, it makes the boss look good. So maybe you can think about the classification model in math or in science. Here's another science example over here. Textbooks in science typically follow this model, or about a boss that is listed like the ones in the example, to think about how we classify things. Our sixth main idea is whole to part. It's a structural analysis. We take the whole and we break it into parts. And it can be easily confused with classification, so please be careful. Here's an example of a whole part, right? The human heart, the whole human heart, can be broken down into numerous parts, and you can see these parts here. So a little different than classification, because classification typically follows a major class and a subclass. This isn't the subclass of heart parts here. It's the whole heart connected by the parts. So, sciences typically follow the whole part model. So, or maybe a paper. Another great example is if you've ever written a proposal, or if you've had an idea for something, you've probably used the whole part model. So I write a lot of proposals for grants, for projects, and it's always, okay, I have this big idea, and now I have to explain how I will work on this idea, break it down, get all this work done, and then how I will have outcomes and deliverables from that big idea. So the whole big idea broken down in parts so I can propose the idea and get money for it. So those are a couple of examples of how we connect these ideas to our own lives. So our seventh idea is problem solution. Involves cause and effect relationships, but it goes beyond identifying the cause and explaining why the effect. Problem solution proposes to fix whatever the problem is with a solution. So that's the main difference. And here's an example. This is a diagram of a main character that we could use to outline. A writer could use to explain the major challenges a character faces in a work of fiction, that they had a couple of major problems. There were causes resulting from that major problem. Those causes had effects, but ultimately the end result is to focus on the solution. So we've got problem, solution, of which cause and effect can be a part, but ultimately we get from problem to solution. And lastly, we reflect again of characters in novels that faced problems but ultimately in the end had solutions to those problems, or a paper that you've written that had a problem solution model. You had to identify a problem and propose solutions, or even this Rubik's Cube, right? Problem, this has cause effect. Every time you turn a Rubik's Cube, it affects the outcome, but ultimately you get to the solution of solving the problem, the puzzle. And then lastly, we have opinion reason. Strong ideas about current issues follow an opinion reason model. We need to back up the viewpoint with reasons, and it uses words like should, believe, and need. So here's a final example of Senator Smith as the best candidate for the job. He should be reelected because he votes yes.